On December 3, 1944, in the battered outskirts of Aachen, Germany, the US 30th Infantry Division sent a report up to 8th Corps headquarters that immediately set off alarms. A single German sniper, positioned somewhere inside the ruins near Jakobstrasse, has halted the advance of 2 battalions for nearly 4 hours. His shots come from different angles, different heights, sometimes only minutes apart, suggesting he's either impossibly fast or working from a fortified double nest, a tactic German sharpshooters perfected on the Eastern Front. What makes this one different is the casualty pattern. Every man hit so far was carrying optics, a lieutenant with binoculars, a radio operator with a signal mirror, a forward observer adjusting for the 118th Field Artillery. In a war filled with snipers, this marksman seems to be hunting the watchers themselves, dismantling the platoon's ability to see. Reports note no muzzle flash, no scope glint, no silhouette, nothing but precision strikes from an enemy no one can locate. By mid-morning, frustration is turning into paralysis. Veteran NCOs warn that rushing the kill zone will produce nothing but bodies, yet the longer the unit waits, the more the Germans reorganize behind the collapsing city blocks. And it's at this exact moment, when doctrine, experience, and common sense all point towards stalemate, that a young private reaches for an object not listed in any manual. It seems absurd, it seems desperate, but what he does next will challenge assumptions far beyond this single street. Counter-sniper tactics exist on paper. Manuals describe watching for muzzle flash, triangulating sound, and saturating likely windows with machine gun fire and high explosives. In the chaos of real ruins, with broken glass, drifting smoke, and echoes bouncing between stone walls, these methods often fail or come at high cost. To search for the shooter, someone must still lean out, raise binoculars, or edge a scope toward a suspected opening, knowing that the enemy is already settled behind his sights. As another attempt ends with a man going down halfway through a glance around the corner, one private, tired and out of conventional options, reaches for an ordinary object in his kit. What he does with it will challenge assumptions far beyond this single street. By 1943, German snipers possessed an influence on the battlefield that far exceeded their actual numbers. In reports from Stalingrad, Sevastopol, and later from Cassino and Normandy, Allied officers described how single, well-concealed riflemen could halt entire units, forcing them to ground and drawing disproportionate artillery and small arms fire toward one stubborn ruin or church tower. The typical German sniper carried a standard Carabiner 98K rifle, fitted with a telescopic sight, and relied less on exotic equipment than on training, patience, and an intimate understanding of light, shadow, and terrain. Many had been schooled on carefully prepared ranges and then hardened in the brutal street fighting of the Eastern Front before being transferred west. German doctrine treated these men as a strategic investment. Placed at road junctions overlooking bridges or embedded in the upper floors of solid stone houses, they were tasked with slowing advances, targeting leaders, radio operators, and heavy weapon crews, and creating the constant sense that no movement was truly safe. To support them, engineers prepared firing slits, false walls, and alternate positions so that a sniper could shift between hides as soon as his first location drew fire. Some worked with spotters equipped with field glasses, others coordinated with machine gun teams to exploit any confusion their shots created. Allied armies did not ignore the threat. They trained their own snipers, instructed infantry to avoid skyline silhouettes, and warned units to study likely vantage points before moving. Field manuals urge careful scanning of windows, rooftops, and rubble piles, through binoculars and scopes from behind cover. In practice, this created a cruel problem. To find the sniper, someone still had to lift an optical device into an exposed line of sight, turning observation into a gamble. In the maze of shattered European towns with glass fragments flashing in unpredictable ways and echoes bending the sound of each shot, theory and reality diverged. It was within this gap that improvised ideas, however unorthodox, began to matter. The object that will shift the balance in this stalled crossroads fight is nothing more than a dented aluminum mess tin, the sort issued to every American infantryman and rarely thought about beyond mealtimes. Its owner is a young private whose background lies far from formal doctrine or sniper schools. He grew up on a Midwestern farm where distances were judged by how sound carried across open fields, where a loose fence post revealed itself by the angle of morning light, and where a predator's presence could be sensed by the sudden silence in a stand of trees. These instincts did not disappear when he exchanged overalls for a uniform. They followed him into Europe, where ruined houses replaced barns and tree lines became lines of fire. Pinned behind a collapsed storefront at the edge of the street, he has nothing to do but observe. Sunlight glints off shattered glass scattered across the pavement. A puddle left by an earlier shell burst shimmers as smoke drifts past. A broken wardrobe lies on its side, and a shard of mirror embedded in its frame flares bright enough to make everyone duck. In civilian life, reflections were small annoyances. Here, they are signals, thin slivers of warning that something in the street ahead is watching back. The sniper's location remains maddeningly elusive. No distinct muzzle flash, no clear silhouette, no betrayed movement in the black rectangles of ruined houses. Yet the private realizes that he does not need to see the shooter directly. He simply needs to see the street as the sniper sees it, but from a safer angle than the next man who leans out and becomes a target. That is when the idea, strange, simple, and easy to dismiss, comes to him. The mess tin has a clean, curved interior, polished from countless washings. Tilted correctly, it can catch and redirect light. It can turn a deadly corner into a second-hand vantage point. The notion sounds almost foolish in the middle of a firefight, but in this moment the difference between foolish and effective is measured only in survival. If you're enjoying this story, hit like, share it with someone who also loves hidden chapters of history, and subscribe for more hidden stories of World War II. And after you finish the documentary, share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your take. It begins with caution, born from hours of exposure to invisible danger. The private presses himself flat behind a wall pitted by small arms fire, extends one arm outward, and angles the mess tin just beyond the edge of the bricks. He relies on intuition more than precision, on the same instinct that once let him judge whether a barn roof was catching morning light or concealing movement in shadow. He is not inventing anything new. Soldiers in the previous war used crude trench periscopes built from wood, wire and broken glass to look over parapets without exposing their heads. The principle is simple. Use reflected light to see what direct sight would make fatal. The curved interior of the tin catches a band of brightness. At first, the reflection shows only fragments of the ruined street, broken shutters hanging from hinges, sections of roofing scattered like paper, and a jagged chimney leaning precariously against a gable. The image is small and warped, and the private adjusts the angle by millimeters, scanning the street in narrow slices. He takes his time, knowing that haste is exactly what the sniper waits for. Then he notices something out of place. A patch of darkness near the upper floor of a gutted house looks thicker than the shadows around it. A thin, straight line interrupts the rough texture of brick. There is a faint circular form that does not belong in a shattered wall. These irregularities are subtle, but they match the pattern described in every briefing on German sniper hides, elevated, recessed, and aligned with the most exposed point of the street. The geometry from the reflection aligns perfectly with the angle from which the previous shots were fired. He signals the squad, not with words but with a brief gesture. Moments later, a coordinated burst of suppressive fire and smoke rounds strike the suspected position. The shooting that had pinned them for nearly an hour falls silent. The platoon does not celebrate. There is no certainty in these moments. But the absence of another single, precise crack tells them something important. For the first time all morning, the street is no longer owned by an unseen rifleman. And for the private holding the tin, the implications of what he has just done are only beginning to unfold. The reflection trick works once, and at first it seems like the kind of small battlefield improvisation that lives and dies, within a single platoon. But word spreads the way it always does in combat. Fast, quietly, and with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Soldiers in the neighbouring squad hear that the pinned unit found a sniper, without losing another man. A few ask how. Others shake their heads, convinced it was blind luck. In the absence of official guidance, frontline troops rely on what seems to work, and in the ruins of Europe, anything that prevents another casualty receives attention. Yet the mess tin method sits uneasily within the larger framework of Allied training. Field manuals printed in the early 1940s focus heavily on minimizing reflections, not using them. Troops are taught to dull their helmets, cover shiny buckles, and keep watch faces hidden so that sunlight does not betray their position. Reflections, according to doctrine, invite death. The notion of deliberately raising a reflective surface into an open line of fire appears reckless to those who have internalized these rules. Some non-commissioned officers dismiss the method immediately, muttering that the enemy will simply shoot the glint and hit whichever hand is holding it. But battlefield logic evolves under pressure. When used from deep cover, with only a small portion of the tin exposed and the private's body kept well behind masonry, the risk is far less than poking out a helmet or binoculars. Meanwhile, accounts from Italy and France had already hinted at similar ideas. Troops using fragments of vehicle glass to check alleyways, or angling shaving mirrors to scan rooftops without stepping into the open. These were rarely written down, but veterans remembered them. The mess tin is simply the latest variation on a theme born of necessity rather than doctrine. Still, not everyone approves. Some officers insist on sticking to manuals, arguing that unofficial tricks undermine discipline. Others quietly allow the experiment to continue, reasoning that a method which prevents casualties deserves space to prove itself. In this tension between the printed page and lived experience, the private's improvised tool becomes something larger, a challenge to assumptions that had long shaped how soldiers were supposed to see the battlefield. And soon, what began as a single man's instinctive action will push beyond mere rumour and start to influence how entire units confront hidden threats. Innovation on the front rarely spreads through formal orders. It travels through imitation, quietly, horizontally, one squad observing another and adopting whatever seems to work. In the weeks after the Crossroads incident, variants of the reflection trick appear across different companies moving through contested towns. A scout in one unit tapes a sliver of broken mirror to the end of a bayonet, using it to scan alley intersections before stepping into view. Engineers clearing buildings begin sliding small reflective surfaces along doorframes to check for the telltale flash of a scope hidden in darkened interiors. None of this is written in any field manual, but the logic is irresistible. Anything that reduces exposure buys soldiers precious seconds of life. These improvisations echo older tools from earlier conflicts. In the First World War, trench fighters built periscope rifles from wood and salvaged glass, allowing them to fire without rising above the parapet. Later generations of soldiers absorbed the lesson instinctively, even if the devices themselves changed. By 1944, instructors at sniper and reconnaissance courses warn students not only about exposing reflective surfaces, but also teach them to search for the same glints when hunting enemy marksmen. Observation is framed as both a skill and a weapon, where understanding how light behaves can reveal what camouflage hides. Meanwhile, after-action reports begin to reference quicker detection of firing points in urban terrain. Though the documents never credit any single technique, commanders note that units are spending less time frozen by unseen riflemen and more time manoeuvring to neutralize them. The improvement is incremental but noticeable. Small reflective tools, whether mess tins or shards of glass, start appearing in the hands of forward observers, scouts, and even medics checking for danger before crossing exposed gaps. Over time, what began as a single private's instinct merges into a broader evolution in fieldcraft. Soldiers learn not only to avoid reflections but to manipulate them, reading shadows, recognizing unnatural lines, and identifying where a lens might be hidden behind rubble. The battlefield becomes not just a landscape of ruins but a puzzle of angles and light, one where an ordinary piece of metal can expose an extraordinary threat. And as more troops adopt these improvised methods, the line between a trick and a technique begins to fade, driving the story toward a wider transformation none of them yet recognize. The effect of the reflection method is difficult to quantify, because its success is recorded not in dramatic kills or captured snipers, but in the silent absence of casualties that never occur. Official reports rarely mention such details. War diaries focus on captured ground, ammunition spent, and confirmed enemy losses, metrics that can be measured. Yet between the lines, a pattern begins to emerge as the Allied advance pushes deeper into Germany's western defences in late 1944 and early 1945. Units that once lost hours pinned beneath a single rifle shot now report quicker identification of firing points. Platoons write of engagements where potential ambush sites are scanned and dismissed without exposing anyone unnecessarily. Small unit leaders start noting how rapidly their men adapt to shifting light, using reflections to check upper floors, lofts and rafters, before calling forward their machine gun teams. This growing efficiency reflects a subtle but important shift in fieldcraft. The learning curve of Allied armies in Europe has long been recognised by historians. Early struggles in North Africa and Sicily were followed by steady improvements in coordination, reconnaissance, and urban combat technique. Hidden in this curve is an accumulation of tiny innovations, dozens of unofficial practices that reduced risk at the point of contact. The reflection trick is one among many, but its influence appears in the way later manuals pay more attention to observation techniques and the use of indirect angles when checking exposed ground. Post-war military schools expand their sections on detecting camouflage, interpreting glints, and reading the battlefield through indirect light rather than direct sight. No formal recognition is ever given to the soldiers who first raised mess tins or mirror shards over rubble. Their names appear only in personnel rosters, not in citations, yet their decisions ripple outward. By early 1945, German reports complain that Allied infantry are less easily fixed in place by isolated snipers, forcing defenders to rely more on machine guns and prepared obstacles instead of single shooters. The advantage once held by small sniper teams narrows, and with each narrow escape from a hidden rifleman, the effectiveness of reflective improvisation proves itself again. It becomes part of the unspoken heritage of frontline adaptation, valuable not because it is written in doctrine, but because it kept men alive long enough to take the next street. The stage is now set for an understanding that stretches beyond the war itself. Long after the ruins of Europe were rebuilt and the last wartime rifle fell silent, militaries continued to confront the same ancient dilemma: how to see without being seen. The technological answers changed dramatically. By the late 20th century, fibre optic cameras, ballistic shields with viewing ports, helmet-mounted optics, and digital scope systems appeared in training manuals. Yet their logic could be traced back to the same principle, rediscovered by frontline infantrymen in 1944, using an indirect angle to gather information with minimal exposure. At military museums, trench periscopes from the First World War are displayed beside later combat optics, forming a historical chain that links early wooden contraptions to the mirrored shards and polished tins used by soldiers decades later. Instructors at modern military academies still teach the importance of understanding light behaviour, identifying unnatural reflections, and exploiting angles that reveal hidden threats without stepping into a shooter's line of fire. Field exercises simulate urban environments where students learn to interpret the smallest distortion on a reflective surface. Though technology has advanced far beyond improvised tools, the underlying method has not vanished. It simply evolved, carried forward because it answered a universal need on every battlefield. The private who first raised his mess tin toward a deadly street likely never imagined that such a simple action would echo so far. To him, it would have seemed like common sense, a habit born of an upbringing rich in observation rather than formal theory. He was not attempting to challenge doctrine, he was trying to keep his squad alive, but the battlefield has a way of preserving ideas that work. As decades passed and new conflicts emerged in cities, worlds apart from the rubble of wartime Europe, soldiers once again found themselves relying on indirect angles, reflective checks, and glimpses of danger seen not directly but through a controlled sliver of light. Somewhere, in a different war and under a different sky, a young soldier edges a mirror around a corner, searching for the shape of a rifle hidden in shadow. The silence that follows, no shot, no sudden crack, no man dropped by an unseen hand, is the quiet continuation of a moment born generations earlier. It is the lasting legacy of a single glint on a battlefield where survival depended on seeing first.